Okay. All right, so we're going to start with numerals and counters. And this, in the preliminary exercise, is basically one-to-one correspondence, except now we're associating a number with the one-to-one, if you will. So I always start with just a very basic chart. I have numbers 1 through 5. And then I just thought this box was really cute, so I wanted to use it for something. Makes the activity a little bit more interesting, and you can find things like this, but I have my counters inside the box. And you want to make sure that you have, how many counters would you need for this activity?
15. Is it 15? Oh, 1.
1 through 5. Yes, so you want to make sure that you have the number of counters that associates with the number of spots you have on your chart. So it is 15 for this one. Good job. So hopefully I counted that out properly before we started. We'll find out, I guess. And then anybody notice anything about the counters themselves?
They're all the same.
They're all the exact same. So that is something that you want to ensure. That was one of the counting skills that we talked about, understanding that different types of objects can be counted into the same group is a skill that they learn over time. So you can isolate the difficulty by making sure the counters are all the same. All right, so you can be my student since you're right here. That's okay. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Would you like to try?
Would you like me to try?
Only if you want to.
Okay.
You want to try?
Sure. One, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We're just barely for the minute.
Having a party.
Yay! So cute.
Are these for infants too?
No, for infants I would
Receptivity
really
and
focus on the one-to-one. So, I mean, you could do something like this and count it out because they are still focusing on one spot with one object. But as you can tell on here, obviously this is paper, so the placement is not as obvious. It's outlined in a two-dimensional form versus when we're using these other objects that actually have three-dimensional indentions, they can see where each thing is supposed to be placed. So this becomes more abstract, and then we're also focusing on the counting component and laying the foundation for the numerals as well. So I would doubt that you'd have an infant who'd be ready for this level, but still important for you to know like where they go with it and how those activities build to work up to something like this. So any basic questions? Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you can extend this activity. So I'll bring over a couple to show you.
Oh, real quick.
Yeah.
Before you put the bears on, you said 1 and then just counted the empty squares. Are we supposed to do that?
For the initial presentation, I would. That's a good question. Anybody have any thoughts on to why you'd want to include the counting of the empty squares in the beginning?
So that they understand when they put an object in it, that's what it represents.
Right. So it's that laying the foundation for one-to-one, that these squares represent a placeholder. So you don't really need to include that after the initial presentation if the child understands that you place objects in each of the squares. But if you see a child who just kind of is putting it all over the place, and they might be counting, but they're not understanding that these are placeholders, then you might need to reintroduce the fact that those are spots.
What age group would you typically see starting to work with this? Like, would you see it in the ones room, or is it more of like a twos room type thing?
Because this is really still one-to-one, I could see it in the toddler room. Definitely focus more on twos though. Especially with all the extensions that go with the activity, they're definitely going to be more of twos activities. But the initial presentation, if you have a toddler who can count and who understands one-to-one, this is a good next step. So would you guys say that you have any 1-year-olds who can do either of those things?
We would have kids in our class that could do that, but we just don't have that work.
Yeah, and I have a template that you can use to create this, and then you use any object that can fit inside these
Really
compartments.
the same 15-year-old.
I like that
Yeah.
better because it keeps everything in mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yep.
hard doing numbers and counters and they start like trailing off with them.
Yes. So that's where this would come in handy for your classroom. So we have a template for through 10.
That's awesome.
Are these templates on the Padlet site?
I'll double check. They should be. If they're not,
might-
I have them. I mean, I created it,
I
so.
might need to steal that
Nice.
from my classroom because 2 of my numbers and counters have now been broken. So I can just put the counters in a basket and let them use it that way for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, so the one component I'm sure you'll recognize that this is missing is the odd and even.
That's true.
So this is really good for your
can do it as a separate
beginning
lesson.
students,
Yeah.
and then you can introduce how to lay them out for odd and even
Okay.
later on, which we don't really cover odd and even with the 2-year-olds, so
Yeah.
we're not going to get to that component here.
Okay.
So even when we do the actual numbers and counters we'll do here in a minute, we'll lay them out in this way versus the way that you lay them out in Children's
Mhm.
House. So it's different. That's the main difference between the activities. You guys are neat about it. So I have one going through 10, and then of course you can create these to go through any number. So if 10 you feel like is too much, but they've mastered 5, maybe you want to go up to 7. So you can create a chart that's going to suit the needs of the
Or
students.
you
in the
can just
classroom.
cut that chart.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't have like a template that just goes to 7.
Yeah.
You would have to.
I was like, I'm not going to make one. I can just
Yeah.
cut that one.
Then what
So
if somebody else needs it up to 10?
Well, then they can put a new one.
you can have one for every all the way up.
Laminated?
Maybe 5 is too much.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to start with just 3. So you could do that too. That's an option. And you could test that out. Maybe the infants
Yeah.
or the toddlers especially, maybe 15 objects is too much. So you'd want to start with just 3.
3.
Yeah. You could start at point. So an extension that you can do with this, going off of our conversation and more so combining groups of objects, you can, I would probably still use the same object or similar objects that just are different colors, and you can do sets of objects to go along with each quantity of number. So this is where it comes back into play the number counting stacker. So say these are my objects, rather than having it on a nice stacker, you could use these objects with this chart and have all of your objects in a basket. And then you can encourage them to sort them out by color first, and then they have to figure out which number they go with.
Makes sense.
Like you would advise doing all the same color first?
Yes. So going back to some initial principles, isolation of difficulty. So having to separate out your quantities and then determining which category they belong to is more difficult than having all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And Becca can speak to this. You want to tell your story about your transportation counting basket?
Oh, yeah. So I have their transportation themed counters, but they have like boats and cars and buses
Yeah.
and trains in them. And I've had 2 students now who didn't really understand that it was a group of objects, but they expected they had the number 6, so they expected there to be 6 trains or 6 buses or 6 boats. One of them needed to only have 6. And I had one student who actually couldn't even complete the work. I specifically set it up for him so there was a certain amount for each number, and that was the only way he could complete it. Because he didn't understand that it was just a group or a themed group. Each one needed to have a certain number.
Yes.
Xander actually does that now too.
Okay, so
He'll go, I don't have enough cars. I'm like, well, use a boat. Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
And
But
she
I had
was
one student
seeing
who was
this.
like, I can't
Okay,
do
can't
that.
do
Yeah.
So like that video that we saw where she was
Yeah.
asking to count out of order, kind of the same. It's another principle that made it difficult for them to understand how to complete the
Mhm.
activity because there was an obstacle in the way.
And I just
I
always
get
thought
it.
it was like a silly quirk that one of my kids had, but then another one did it too, and I'm like, well, there's something going on here.
And then she learned about the principles and was like,
Yeah,
oh.
so I'm like, oh, well, now I feel bad because I'm making it more difficult than it should be. Yeah.
So anyway, as you can see, having the chart like this, you could actually combine this chart if you had the number and counter block that you could combine them together so you can show them how those two things correspond.
Cool.
All right, so there is an actual extension in the write-up for numbers and counters that aligns a little bit more with the way that they'll be doing it in Children's House. But we're going to skip over that because that requires that they really recognize the numerals. So you would need to work with the chart for a long time before introducing the numbers and counters on their own because, like I said, it requires that they actually recognize the numerals. So we'll put that on pause and move back around to the extension.